Welcome everyone to the first lecture of 2022 for the Milwaukee Society of the Archaeological Institute of America. My name is Jane Peterson and I'm currently serving as president of our local Milwaukee Society. I'm absolutely thrilled that you've decided to spend part of your Sunday afternoon with us. Today's lecture by Dr. Kehoe promises to be both fascinating and provocative, just like Alice herself. Warmest welcome to all of our members and friends from the Milwaukee community. Greetings also to students from UWM and Marquette in our audience today. And to those of you joining us from further afield, it's a pleasure to have you with us as well. Our transition to online lectures would not be possible without the technical support of Dr. Bettina Arnold. So as she's assisting us again today, thanks very much from all of us to Bettina Arnold. During the Zoom webinar, your microphones will automatically be muted. You can submit your questions for our speaker at any time during her lecture by typing them into the Q&A box accessible using the icon located on your screen. After Dr. Kehoe finishes her lecture, your questions will be read to her. Before I introduce today's speaker, please allow me just a few moments to tell you about the good works of the Archaeological Institute of America to promote and support archaeology. Participation in the National Lecture Program is one of the primary benefits that our local societies enjoy. Every year, with the financial and logistic support of AIA headquarters, we're able to bring our community several free and public lectures given by world-renowned archaeologists who share with us their fascinating discoveries and insights. This year, our AIA membership dues funded 2 national speakers, and our Milwaukee Society has supplemented those with local speakers to round out our lecture program. Many of AIA's 100 local societies are still conducting their lectures virtually. Links to both national and local lectures hosted by many of these societies are accessible by visiting the calendar of events on the AIA's webpage. As a result, each and every one of you has the option of attending an amazing array of both national and local lectures hosted by societies across the US and Canada. I encourage you to take a moment and look over the upcoming lecture titles. There are really an array of fascinating topics. Just a few examples to whet your appetite, perhaps. Consider joining the Houston Society's Valentine-themed lecture, Sex in the Cities, on February 13th, when Dr. Dylan Rogers will discuss seduction and flirtation at Greek drinking parties. Or how about learning about the archaeology of cheese? That's certainly a subject near and dear to the hearts of many Wisconsinites. On February 26th, famous European archaeologist Dr. Peter Bogutsky from Princeton will discuss what archaeologists know about prehistoric cheese making. These are just a few of the exceptional lectures you can hear as part of the AIA's open access lecture series. Since 1879, the Archaeological Institute of America has been supporting archaeology through a number of programs. Beyond the high-impact lectures like those just described, the AIA actively supports archaeology in many other ways as well, from supporting professional archaeologists with research funding to providing scholarships that enable students to participate in field work, from making research accessible to all through their publications, to being an active force protecting and preserving sites. No matter what your level of training or interest, AIA's programs benefit everyone who shares a curiosity about archaeology. The AIA plays a central role in disseminating archaeological research through its publications. Members receive one or both of the publications shown here as a benefit of membership. The American Journal of Archaeology is one of the flagship academic journals that focuses on research in the Mediterranean world. And Archaeology Magazine is a wonderful, beautifully illustrated magazine published 6 times a year. Each issue highlights new discoveries and provides in-depth stories on a range of fascinating topics. The articles are reliably engaging in the tradition of the very best of science writing. It's a really wonderful perk of membership. If you're looking for a unique or affordable gift for someone with an interest in archaeology, history, or travel, consider giving a membership to the AIA. And this magazine can come with a perk for that subscription. It's really a great way to support AIA's work. As folks start to engage more actively with in-person public-facing activities, AIA is ready to help provide a range of outlets to explore archaeology, from their annual fieldwork bulletin, which is available for students and volunteers looking for ways to train in archaeological excavation, to the AIA Tour program, which is currently running both small group tours, land-based and on cruise ships. These tours involve numerous excursions and excellent educational programming. Other hands-on events include the annual International Archaeology Day celebrations. In 2022, we're hoping to sponsor a Milwaukee Society event in honor of that occasion as well. With all these benefits in mind, I'd encourage you to support the AIA. If you're not a member yet, please consider joining. There are a variety of membership levels. They're all very reasonably priced. Many, in fact, cost less than you'd expect a subscription to Archaeology magazine alone. For example, undergraduates can join for just $25 a year. Teachers in K through 12, and military personnel can join for just $40 a year. If you're already a member, thank you so much for sticking with us during the challenges of COVID. And please remember to renew your subscription when you receive reminders from the AIA membership office and our society treasurer. Supporting AIA with a gift is also an option. As a nonprofit organization, we depend on these gifts to sustain and grow our programs, as well as through subscriptions and membership. Your gifts are tax deductible and allow the good works of the AIA to go forward. If you're considering making a gift, please feel free to contact either the AIA through the information on the screen, or consider contacting me through our archaeology website as well. Before we move on, I just want to also remind folks of our next upcoming lecture, which will be held on March 6th. Dr. Chris Fisher will discover his work uncovering and documenting Honduran cities using LiDAR technology in a lecture entitled "The Application of LiDAR Scanning for Documentation of Ancient Cities and Regions." That lecture will also be presented virtually. As a reminder, Dr. Kehoe has generously agreed to allow us to record her lecture. The recording will be added to our website soon after the lecture. So if you would like to listen again, or you know someone who might enjoy hearing it, those are certainly options. It's now my distinct honor and privilege to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Alice Beck Kehoe. Many of you know Alice as a longtime member and officer of our local Milwaukee Society. Her local contributions to archaeology in both professional and public spheres have brought her in contact with many. Personally, I've known Alice for more than 30 years myself. I came to Milwaukee originally to serve as her sabbatical replacement at Marquette soon after I'd finished my PhD. Over the years, she's always been a generous and welcoming colleague and an example of the highest professional integrity and productivity. For that example, I'm grateful. Alice graduated magna cum laude from Barnard College in 1956 and received her PhD in anthropology from Harvard University in 1964. She began her academic career as an assistant professor of anthropology at the University of Nebraska. After several years there, she moved to Milwaukee and began a long and illustrious career at Marquette University, retiring as an emeritus professor in 2000. The Northwestern Plains have been a primary geographic interest throughout her career. Alice has conducted extensive archaeological and ethnographic fieldwork in Montana on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation and in Saskatchewan, Canada, gaining experience on a number of Native American and First Nation bison drive sites, religious sites, as well as historical sites. Her dissertation challenged the prevailing anthropological theory of the day, that the ghost dance religion, widespread among Native Americans in the late 19th century, had died out. Alice documented that the religion was, in fact, alive and well as an active part of spiritual practice among Plains groups. And this notion that reality often contradicts prevailing theory has become a central guiding force across Alice's prolific career. She's no stranger to taking controversial positions in archaeology. She was an early proponent of feminist archaeology and co-edited one of the first collections on the subject with Sarah Nelson in 1990, entitled Powers of Observation. She also was an early adopter when it came to seeing evidence for long distance contacts between Mesoamerica and large sites in the American Southeast, such as Cahokia. And she gives weight to the possibility that the Kensington runestone is, in fact, a 14th century artifact left behind by Scandinavian explorers to North America, rather than a 19th century hoax. She's published on all of these subjects and more. A prolific author with at least 18 books to her credit, she's published book-length treatments on all of the subjects mentioned today. In addition, she's published a number of textbooks that have influenced generations of students. Her interest in transoceanic contacts, about which we'll hear more today, has a deep personal history that culminated in a 1916 book, Traveling Prehistoric Seas. Her work across a range of subjects continues to be widely cited and influential in contemporary archaeological scholarship. While we're on the subject of publication, it only seems fitting to bring to your attention Alice's memoir that has recently been published by the University of Nebraska Press. Girl Archaeologist is certainly on my reading list, and here's the information where you can order a discounted copy for yourself. I know she'll be happy to sign a copy for you at an upcoming AIA Milwaukee lecture when we resume meeting in person. In addition to Alice's scholarly accomplishments, her career has also been notable because of her service to the profession. Over the years, she's held offices with the Central States Archaeological Society and the American Anthropological Association. In 2016, she received the Distinguished Service Award from the Plains Anthropological Society. And of course, AIA Milwaukee owes her a large debt for service to our organization as well. As a reminder, at any time during her lecture, you may type your questions into the Q&A box. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Alice Kehoe, presenting today's AIA Milwaukee Society lecture entitled Traveling Prehistoric Seas, Boats, the Oceans, and Archaeological Evidence for Precolumbian Voyages. Alice?
Yes.
Okay, so let's see if we can make this work, Alice. Share screen.
All right. So I'll start.
We don't have Alice, the screen is not showing the slides yet.
What? Oh dear. Oh dear. So I should not do.
Look for the share screen icon on at the bottom of your Zoom webinar page first. Start with the share screen, and then you can click on
I
your
have the first
presentation.
screen. I'm sorry. Wait a minute. Share screen.
Yep, click on that.
And share.
There you go.
Hold on.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, now you need to enable the
Play.
Yep, hit play. You were right there. There you go. Nope. Up. The cursor has to go up. There.
To play.
Yep. Hit that.
All right.
Nope.
Okay, I think.
There you go.
Yes.
Got it.
It's good.
Yes.
Right. All right. So I'll start simply with a picture of the cover of my book, which is inexpensive. And down in the lower middle, I have the cover of Stephen Jett's book, published the same year, 2016, Ancient Ocean Crossings. Steve Jett is a longtime colleague. He is a geographer, and he is the preeminent scholar on all the suggestions of pre-Columbian voyages. And his book is an academic scholarly book, Ancient Ocean Crossings, and has a master bibliography and abundant to the utmost references to all suggested pre-Columbian voyages. My book is a selection of these. So if you're seriously interested, you need Jeff's book also. On the right, I'm simply listing the chapters in my book, which I will basically follow for this lecture. And incidentally, any illustrations that are not credited on these slides are photos that I myself have taken. So we have to begin with the basics. In the upper left, the oceans of the world, as they are normally known by geographers. Lower left, the major ocean currents. They are formed by the rotation of the Earth, which results in these circular, they're called gyres, which are strong currents that navigators must be aware of and deal with. Lower right, the major wind currents of the globe. Unlike the ocean currents, the wind currents change seasonally, and a navigator has to know the seasonal winds as well as the major tendencies. And on the upper right, Edwin Joran's analysis of the major shipbuilding traditions in human history. Joran found that there are three basic types of seagoing boats. I have on the left the keel ship, which Duran suggested could be called the nau, which is a root word in Indo-European for ship. The keel ship is what we're all familiar with. It has a keel on the bottom, going along the bottom, which is supposed to stabilize it. And lower left on that picture, you can see a typical ancient keel ship. The keel ship is developed on the Mediterranean, which is a relatively calm sea. When you get into the Atlantic and Pacific, you have much stronger currents. And in Asia, they developed the type of vessel we call the junk. It's basically a Chinese word. The junk, as you see on the right, is flat-bottomed and wide beam. It can be made much bigger than a sailing keel ship. It can carry, and they did, thousands of passengers and all the goods and water and food they needed. So there are two pictures of junks on the right. On the upper left of this picture is a Polynesian seagoing canoe, which is stabilized by outriggers. That's a very different kind of technology from either the keel or the wide beam junk. And Duran uses a Polynesian word vaca for this type of boat. Now, before we get into the basic topic, we have to deal with the myth of Columbus, teaching that the Americas were unknown until the hero Columbus, by grace of God, discovered them in 1492. The foundation for American ideology that North America was a wilderness of savages who needed to be forced to become Christian laborers. The Pope in 1493, only months after Columbus returned to Spain announcing his discoveries, the Pope ordered Spain and Portugal to pursue the Christianization of this new world. The Pope was extending the medieval Crusades begun in 1065. The Crusades, that was the duty of the Pope and all Christians to extend Christianity to every human being, everywhere, and by force if they thought necessary. So that's the basis of the European invasions of America in the historic period. The Pope ignored Scandinavian settlements in northeastern America. The North were Christians and not of much interest to him. Now on this slide, I also include a couple of views of the European discovery of America, drawn by my good colleague, Bernard Perley. Bernard is a citizen of Maliseet First Nation in eastern Canada. His ancestors saw Verrazano and the other Cabot, all of them guys coming over from the east. And their attitude was, who are these guys? And then on the right, Bernie wonders, what are we going to do with all of these people and all these discoveries? Bernard Perley is also a professor of anthropology with a PhD from Harvard. Thanks, Bernie, for giving permission for these cartoons. Now on to the people. The earliest seagoing craft were built in the Middle Paleolithic more than 100,000 years ago. And we know this because human skeletons have been found and radiocarbon dated in New Guinea and especially in Australia that were 60,000 years old. So humans crossed open ocean from Indonesia islands into New Guinea and Australia in the Middle Paleolithic. My colleague from Australia, Robert Bednarik, had a project whereby he and his group reconstructed a Middle Paleolithic seagoing raft using local logs and local fibers for lashing. And what you see is the successful third version of a Middle Paleolithic raft crossing Lombok Strait between actually Bali and Lombok, but Lombok Strait in eastern Indonesia is Wallace's line between the ancient continents of Sunda and Sahel. Bernardnik puts on enough people on that raft, which did successfully cross this open ocean strait, enough people to actually found a colony. So between the men, you see 3 women. You need, he figured, at least 3 women to actually create a human population. Down in the lower left, I show drawings of petroglyphs in Upper Egypt of various kinds of reed boats that were used on the ocean as well as the Nile River in ancient times. A reconstruction of an Egyptian papyrus reed ship. And then next to it, a picture of a Polynesian double-hulled, seagoing, sailing vaca. Now you need people to do these long distance journeys, not necessarily to found a colony. So on the right, I show an ivory walrus ivory carving of a bishop in Scandinavia, who traveled from Iceland to Jerusalem and back in 1150, necessarily using several ships as well as land transport. And over on the right, typical medieval pilgrims who, like the bishop and like a Greenlander in 1365, actually a couple, man and wife, who traveled even farther than the bishop from Greenland through Europe to Jerusalem and back in 1365, after which their surname were Yorsalafari, Jerusalem goers. But down in the lower right, the by far most common kind of travelers, people engaged in trade. Oh, whoops, sorry. Sorry about this. Having trouble finding the mouse to, wait a second. Oh dear, I'm trying to get this thing off the screen, and it's not, I just cannot seem to find the mouse on my screen.
You're doing fine, Alice. Just
Sorry?
you're on the Polynesian slide right now.
Yeah, I know. Is that all that you're seeing?
Yes.
Oh, fine. Okay. I'm seeing a little thing in the middle.
Nope.
Yeah, no problem then. If you're seeing, good. All right. On the top left, you see the Hokulea, which is a full-size, double-hulled Polynesian seagoing passenger and cargo carrying canoe. The two canoes, lashed together with a platform and a cargo hold, are outriggers for each other. The Hokulea was reconstructed and started sailing in 1973. It's still sailing. It's gone all over Polynesia with Polynesian navigators navigating it in the traditional manner. And in 2017, it actually circumnavigated the globe. In the lower left, you see a 1616 picture of a Tonga, Central Polynesian, seagoing, double-held baka canoe. And you can clearly see on this both the platform and the hold underneath for cargo and passengers. And these unfortunate persons encountered a Dutch colonizing ship, which tried to conquer them right away. In the center, I'm showing you chickens. Top center, a rooster in Hawaii. Just below it, a rooster in Cambodia. These are Polynesian chickens, very colorful feathers as well as good meat. Bones of Polynesian chickens were found in the coast of Chile by a perfectly sound archaeological excavation and radiocarbon dated to the 1400s Common Era. Now, these were considered by many the perhaps first absolutely indisputable evidence of Polynesians landing in Chile. In the same area, not in the particular campsite, but in the same area, have been found over the years Polynesian type artifacts, and there are a few skulls that look Polynesian. So it's highly likely that the Polynesians on their last exploration journeys around 1400 reached the Americas, on the coast of Chile, at least. Really, how not? So we have that evidence, and I do show in the center from Cambodia, the Buddha blessing the chicken before it starts on its voyage to Chile. And the bottom center, a photograph of a Chumash canoe. This is from the southwestern tip of California. The Chumash and the Mapuche on the coast of Chile are the only American First Nations to have built plank-built canoes, such as you see. These are Polynesian type vessels, and the Chumash word for this kind of canoe and for lashing it derived from Polynesian words. So those are two evidences of Polynesian landfalls in the Americas. They couldn't colonize, it was full of people. Finally, on the right, I want to talk about tapa cloth and paper. Tapa cloth is made by beating bark fiber with a heavy stone beater. Paper making is a refinement of that technique with some more steps. So you have a soaked bark fiber beaten and beaten with a heavy beater, usually stone. And then when the sheet dries, it's either thicker Polynesian tapa cloth or thin paper. Paper was made in Mesoamerica and famous for books, Mayan books by the thousands. Paper was invented in China and spread from China throughout Eurasia. And the evidence in Mesoamerica is that it was also carried, the technique was carried for making books to Mesoamerica before Columbus. And it survives in Mexico among the Otomi in central Mexico, who make these cutout figurines of spirits, such as you see here, a very intricate paper cutting technique, which is identical to the technique used in China by artists who are national treasures of China, who are masters of this technique. One of the Chinese, relatively recently, visited Mexico, was taken to see the Otomi, see how they made paper, see how they cut it out, and he was astonished that it was exactly like traditional in China. Now let's go on to organisms. You cannot fake organisms. So upper left, sweet potatoes. They are native to northwestern South America, and sweet potatoes were excavated in a central Polynesian site, Mangaea Island, by the very highly respected American archaeologist Patrick Kirch. And he radiocarbon his occupation with the sweet potatoes to the 1100s Common Era. He also consulted with a leading paleobotanist in Europe who confirmed that the Polynesian sweet potatoes remains that Kirk had found are indeed the same as northwestern South American native sweet potatoes. Many centuries later, the Spanish distributed sweet potatoes around the Pacific, very separate diffusion. Below the sweet potatoes, another kind of organism, hookworms. Internal human parasites that not survive the warm climates. They could not have been carried inside of humans over Bering Strait in the paleo times. But they have been found in mummies in America South America that were dated before Columbus. Also, some Melanesian DNA has been identified both in South American pre-Columbian skeleton and in present First Nations in South America. And another organism that predates Columbus in the Americas is tuberculosis. Tuberculosis has been identified in Peruvian mummies that years ago were dated about 700 Common Era. And there was a tuberculosis epidemic in northeastern America from the Gulf of St. Lawrence and up the St. Lawrence River and into the Great Lakes, right at 1000 Common Era, the same time as Greenland Norse landed in the Canadian Maritimes, Newfoundland, and the Canadian coast of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, just at 1000. Tuberculosis is endemic in Scandinavia and elsewhere in Eurasia, and it very likely was carried by those colonizing north who had close encounters with the First Nations of the Maritimes. Now, leaving organisms to objects, in the center, I show the game of Pachisi as you know it. Surely you played it. And the Mesoamerican game of Patoyi, just about the same word. For many years, it was assumed that the Spanish carried Pachisi in the 1500s to Mexico, and the Mexican Indians picked up the game that was from India. Well, it turns out that, thank you, I discovered, and it wasn't hard to discover. I looked, how ancient is Pachisi documented in India, in Asia, in Eurasia? Not long at all. It turns out the first documented notice of the game Pachisi in India was during the reign of Akbar the Great in the late 1500s. The game was carried from Mexico, where it's well documented before the Spanish, for centuries. It's carved in stone, Patoyi boards, in a number of Mesoamerican sites. It was carried to India, and Akbar the Great loved the game. He enthusiastically had huge game boards made in the floor of courtyards of his palaces. And he and his friends enjoyed watching the game as harem girls were the moving pieces on his boards. So Patoyi, where did it come from? It came from Mexico to India. But finally, on the right, what I feel is the absolutely indubitable firm evidence of contacts around 1200 Common Era, the height of the medieval spice trade and eastward explorations for spices and gold from Asia. In Mesoamerica, right around the Isthmus of Tehuantepec that links the Pacific and the Atlantic with a narrow portage, right around there, were discovered a number of clay figurines of animals, sort of dog-like. And through the legs of these animals were axles. And on the axles were mounted wheels. These wheels are not spindle wheels. It wasn't just an accidental putting stuff together. These are purpose-made wheels, purpose-made to go on the axles that go through the figurines so they move. These animal figurines on wheels and axles, where a number of them, several dozen, have been found around Mexico mainly, Mesoamerica, different sites, all dated around the 1200s. There are no other instances anywhere in the Americas before the European invasions beginning with Columbus. No wheel and axle technology anywhere in the Americas except for these wheel figurines. Right at the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, near the great Spanish Pacific port of Acapulco, on the other side of the isthmus. But wheeled animal figurines used both as pull toys for children and also found in temples as the kind of ritual object, as you see in the little inset. These wheeled figurines date back 2,000 years in Asia, and they're very common for 2,000 years. So I think this is clear evidence some Asian got to Mexico in 1200 and somehow showed how to make little animal pull toys or ritual objects. I want to take a moment now to show you some of the scholars, scientists who have supported this question of pre-Columbian voyages. On the lower left, David Kelly, on the left, wearing a hat, who is one of the three who, as I say, broke the Maya code. The three linguists who were able to determine that the Maya hieroglyphs have phonetic quality. They can be read aloud, and you're reading classic Maya. So Kelly is shown reading an inscription in the palace of Lord Pakal of Palenque, and the listener in the middle is the English scientist Joseph Needham, one of the greatest scientists of the 20th century. Joseph Needham developed the science of biochemistry in his lab at Cambridge University. And when he retired, he devoted himself to exploring something that had intrigued him for years: the history of science and technology in China. This resulted in a beautiful series of books called Science and Civilization in China, and a number of collaborators and scholars with Needham developed a series. Needham's explorations in Chinese historic literature and archaeology of nautical technology, the development of those seagoing junks, convinced him that the similarities noted by a number of people between especially Mesoamerica and Eastern Asia were feasible to have been carried across the Pacific in Asian junks. And David Kelly and I were able to get funds to bring Joseph Needham and his principal collaborator to Mexico for 2 weeks to meet with Mexican archaeologists who had excavated a number of features, different parts of Mexico, that Needham had previously identified from pictures and descriptions as possible Trans-Pacific pre-Columbian introductions. So we were able to bring Professor Needham to actually see these in person, see the sites, and talk directly with the excavators. I won't go into all that he found, but it confirmed his interpretation. So he is truly a great scientist. In the upper middle, Alexander von Humboldt, who in 1806 wrote of similarities he had seen in his explorations of America, similarities to what he had seen of Asian artifacts and customs. So Alexander von Humboldt was certainly one of the greatest scientists of the 1800s, as Needham was in a somewhat different way of the last century. To the right of von Humboldt is someone who should be familiar to everybody that goes to movies lately, Stuart Piggott. This is a real Stuart Piggott, not the actor in the Dig. And I took a seminar from Stuart Piggott when he was a visiting professor at Harvard. Down in the lower center, you see a photo of Stuart Piggott, the man in the front writing some notes. During World War II, when he was a commissioned officer in the British Army and took his business from the Army was map reading and guiding troop movements. And on his days off, he went and visited archaeological sites in India. And after the war, he published a Penguin paperback called Prehistoric India, which is a real breakthrough. No more like Sir Mortimer Wheeler, we dig the fortresses, nothing else mattered. Instead, Wheeler said, don't bother with the bazaars. Piggott said, let's dig the bazaars and the villages. So Piggott was humanizing archaeology in the post-war period. He was a wonderful man in every way. And it was he who pushed me into seriously looking into boats across the oceans. Specifically, whether the earliest ceramics in North America, north of Mexico, the earliest ceramics in the Canadian Maritimes around 1100 before Common Era, might have been brought over from coastal Atlantic Europe, Scandinavia, and Britain, because those early woodland shores are so similar in technique, shape, decoration, surface treatments to the European Bronze Age shores, second millennium before Common Era, that Piggott was an authority on from his excavations and knowledge in Britain. So it was Piggott who set me off on transoceanic voyage research. And on the right, the prime authority on the wheeled animal figurines, and another that you'll see shortly, Gordon Echo. Gordon Echo is here shown as a relatively young man in one of his major excavations in the east coast of Mexico in Veracruz. Gordon Echo was curator of Mesoamerican archaeology in the American Museum of New York. Some years after this excavation, he had become the prime authority on Mexican Mesoamerican fakes, and museum curators and wealthy collectors came to him by the hundreds to have him authenticate what might or might not be authentic Mexican artifacts. So let's go on to the strong evidence. Up in the upper left, we see the Palace of Pakal at Palenque. We saw Needham and Kelly in the courtyard before. And unique among the Mesoamerican palaces and buildings is the pagoda. There it is. The pagoda, it was not reconstructed. It was merely stabilized. That is how it was built for Lord Pakal of Palenque in the late classic period in Mexico. It's the pagoda. There's another pagoda. Well, there's actually several in northwestern Yucatan. And here's one just next to the Palenque one, photographed by the German archaeology explorer Theobert Mahler, 1889, in the site of Nocochich in northwestern Yucatan. It's a early post-classic Maya site. It's considered a very minor Maya site, like, minor actually excavation, but it's open to tourists. And only about 30 yards from the pagoda is, now look in middle left, a stone tower. This is another of Mahler's 1889 photographs of Nocochich. Notice the scale, the man standing beside the stone tower. This is unique. No place else in the Americas is there a stone tower with this huge human face in the middle. And in fact, no place else in the entire world is there a massive stone tower with a huge human face in the middle, except, look to the left, the Bayon Temple in Angkor in Cambodia, dated the same time as Nocochich in Yucatan. These two towers are unique in all the world with that big stone face. All right, lower left, the Castillo, step pyramid with temple in Chichen Itza. And next to it, a stone temple in central Java called Candi Suka, which was built in 1437 by a prince of the Majapahit kingdom of central Java. And that central Javan kingdom in the medieval period dominated the transshipment of goods from easternmost Asian Pacific over to the Indian Ocean. It was a wealthy kingdom from what it earned by being the port for transshipment between easternmost Asian shipping and the Western world. The prince had this constructed to gain merit, supposedly in heaven, but in the local court also. And unique among all the temples that princes of that kingdom were constructing at that time is this one that looks remarkably like a typical Mesoamerican step pyramid. What was on top of it is no longer there. It was pretty much in that shape, and the Java Heritage Program removed it. And what was removed, parts are in the museum. So Candi Suka is unique in the western side of the Pacific. I'm showing also, to go along the bottom, the so-called Temple of the Magicians in Uxmal. Again, look at the scale. I tried to get somebody in, both in the Castillo and over here at the Uxmal temple. You can see a man in a white shirt. Matter of fact, it's the same man I was traveling with. And this gives you the immense scale of these temples. Next to it, a photograph I made in Angkor in Cambodia. Again, for scale, there are some monks. And it's the same basic plan, a stepped pyramid with a central stairway leading up to a relatively small temple sanctum on the top. Basic Mesoamerican style, basic throughout Mesoamerica, but not at all exactly the same in the many different places, and there are many variations of it, but the basic plan the same. Over on the lower right, middle, a building in Angkor Wat in Cambodia, core build style structure with arches, and then the temple area in the middle, and below it in the lower right, temple in Chichen Itza, Mayan, again, core build structure with a temple inside. So there's a lot of architectural similarities in temple buildings throughout Asia and into Mesoamerica. And finally, up on the upper right, partially obscured by sharing the screen, is a page. David Kelly had found that calendar astrology, this is doing your horoscope by looking what day of the month, and of course what time of day and what stars were above at your day of birth, is going to determine your life. So you can foretell your future by linking it to the day and the calendar of the heavens, movements, the stars and planets. You all know astrology, daily horoscope in the newspaper. The remarkable similarity in the names of the days of the calendar between the Aztecs, China, and obscured Greek. So Kelly found that the calendar astrology, this is totally fantastic, right? It's all made up. It's not a real thing that anybody would normally discover simply by observation. It's a made up fantasy. It's calendar astrology, so throughout Eurasia, from at least Babylon around 1200 BCE, and in Mesoamerica. So let's go to the Atlantic world here. So up in the left, you see a reconstruction of one of the timber-built sod roof Norse houses from Lonsdale Meadow in the north tip of Newfoundland at the Gulf of St. Lawrence. It was the colony of Vinland described in 2 of the Icelandic sagas, where Eirik the Red, exiled from Norway because he murdered a guy, moved to Iceland and started colonizing Iceland, and then he had to leave again because, yeah, I mean, he wasn't the most stable person. He murdered another guy in Iceland. So he moved with his family to southern Greenland, and they established Norse settlements in southern Greenland that lasted until the mid 1400s. Or cattle in Greenland. So Lonsdale Meadow was financed, actually, the excavations by the National Geographic Society, lots of good radiocarbon dates, very good Norwegian trained archaeologists in charge. And there's no question, but this is indeed a Norse settlement in Newfoundland in Canada, dated right at 1000 Common Era, just like I said on the sagas. But definitely the Norse did colonize Vinland, as they call it. Now in the middle, the notorious Newport Tower. overlooking the harbor at Newport, Rhode Island. It doesn't seem to have any use. And it was assumed to have been built as a windmill support for a 1600s governor of the colony of Rhode Island. Well, the governor did affix windmill sails, and he did use it to power a mill. But there's no evidence that he actually built the tower. And the tower is very odd until you look down the bottom left. This is from the Bayeux Tapestry. It shows the coast of Normandy in France at 1066. The night before William the Conqueror and his fleet sailed across the channel to conquer England, he and his nobles dined on the second floor of a tower in the harbor in Normandy, 1066, getting real close to Vinland, same time basically. And it seems to me that it's remarkably like the Newport Tower, and it do a little more exploration in architectural histories of medieval Europe. There was a fad for building these towers with an arched ground floor and then floors above, with at least one floor above that people use. But this idea of arched pillars holding up the tower, most famous is the Leaning Tower of Pisa. But at any rate, I think that the Bayeux Tapestry suggests that the Newport Tower really was part of the Vinland settlement attempts in the 11th century, the 10,000s. So lower left towards the center, shores of Vinland 1 ceramics for the Canadian Maritimes and St. Lawrence River, dated around 1100 for Common Era. These are the shores that Stuart Piggott identified as remarkably similar to the basic ceramics of Atlantic Europe at the same time. Now, that's what set me off on this from the seminar paper I did for Professor Piggott. In the center, you see drawing in the 1600s of a seagoing Irish carrack. The Irish were building carracks, there's various ways of spelling this. They're basically large canoes covered originally with hide and today with canvas. They may be rowed or they may have sails, as in these large seagoing cargo and passenger carrying carracks that were still in use in the 17th century in the Irish Sea. And in the middle bottom, the Brendan, a reconstructed carrack, reconstructed by Tim Severin, again with National Geographic support. Severin sailed the Brendan from Scandinavia across the North Atlantic to Canada and showed that it really was possible for these hide-covered, wooden-framed boats to cross the North Atlantic. This is what Piggott told me to look into. And finally, on the upper right, the Kensington Runestone. There it is, being held by Olof Oman, a Swedish immigrant farmer, to northwestern Minnesota village called Kensington near Alexandria, Minnesota. And it's a ceremony marking Oman's discovery of the stone buried under the soil of his farm. He was pulling trees out of what he wanted to make a pasture on his farm. And one of the trees, the mature poplar trees, the ring showed it was about 40 years old. As he pulled it up, this stone was wrapped in its taproots. Now, everybody, including Smithsonian, it's a hoax. Everybody knows there couldn't possibly have been any north in Minnesota in, says on the stone, 1362. So Owen must have carved this in the winter when, as a farmer, he had nothing to do. Okay, forget about all of that. The point is that every archaeologist who's had any field experience, probably like me, learned in the first week of field school to recognize the marks of tree roots across artifacts. You pick up a stone artifact or a shirt and there's this line across it. You think, is it painted? And your instructor said, no, kid, that's from a tree root. Learn to recognize the tree root markings. As tree roots grow, there's a chemical that comes out of the end of the growing tree root. And if it's going across stone or a shirt, it's going to leave a mark. There are two wide taproot marks on the back of the Kensington runestone. They were held by the taproots of a tree. Oman was honest. Down in the lower right, pictures of the Kensington stone on the far right face of the stone. Next to it, the side of the stone where the inscription is continued. And then down next to it, a more clear picture that I found of the runes. So it's inscribed in runes, but not in the pre-Christian style of runestones. Instead, it's written like a Latin text by somebody who must have been educated. But of course, because Scandinavia had been Christian for 2.5 centuries before the date inscribed on the stone of 1362. And the stone says that a party of Norsemen were going west of Vinland on an inquiring expedition. Doesn't say what they went to acquire, but what would you acquire? Luxury furs. Now there's a reason why they went there. It's a historic reason. The German Hanseatic League had conquered their port and cut off their fur trade, which was their source of income. Able to do so because the Black Death in the around 1350 had so depopulated Scandinavia they could not resist the well-funded German merchants in the Hanseatic League, who brought in 3,000 armed German soldiers to take over the port and the very lucrative fur trade and cut the Norse out. This is just like the Nazi invasion to conquer Bergen, the port. So it eventually, after actually not very many years, the Scandinavians' own army was able to get the Germans out and resume the fur trade, and there was no reason to go back to America. So finally, I picked up the term dubitanda, Latin for what is doubted, from a philosophy of science book. So these are things that are doubted that I cannot speak as surely about as I could about the wheeled animals, and also on that slide, I didn't actually talk about it, a strange animal figurines found by a temple in the Honduran site of Cihuatan, dated right around 1200, the same site as those wheeled animals came from. And that figurine showed a animal, a kind of feline, kind of a dog, wearing a collar with little copper bells, exact like the very common for 2,000 years Asian figurines called lion dogs or Chinese fu dogs. So I didn't speak about them, but you were looking at it. And the ones in the El Salvador site are unique in the Americas. Nothing else has ever been found like that. And they were found as recently as 2013 by American archaeologist and her Salvadoran co-director, both absolutely reputable archaeologists. So there are now two Asian unique kinds of figurines in El Salvador, right at 1200, height of the medieval spice trade. One is this common Asian lion dog, food dog, temple guardian spirit, and the other are these wheeled pull toys or ritual figurines, wheels and axles. But here are the ones that are less obviously imports. So on the upper left, a page of one of the 4 pre-Columbian books that the Spanish saved to burning thousands. They brought 4 books back, 9 books back to the Spanish rulers for the court. This is one of them, and it shows the lower scene. The deity of games and pleasures, parties, happily overseeing dancers. And notice how the dancers have these very stylized arm and hand and posture, which look remarkably like traditional Asian dances. And down in the lower left, a page of a book showing what in India are called mudras, stylized hand gestures, each with a particular meaning, almost like sign language. And the Maya were using these gestures so much like mudras that people in India who know mudras say, oh yeah, I can read that. Yeah, right, it's this, that, and the other mudra. But how can I absolutely prove? No. Down in the lower left, you see a figurine of the Buddha. He's seated on his lotus throne, which looks kind of like a big cushion. And he's using the mudra of one hand pointing down. And this is the mudra for witness. He's asking the earth below him to witness his enlightenment. Now look over right next to it, a drawing from a Maya palace carving showing a Maya king seated on his throne with one hand down, witnessing. His arms and hands are exactly like the Buddha. Witness, he is king. And in the center, another Buddha. Again, he's extending one arm down, witness. And he's sitting in the same position as the Maya kings, not just this one, but others. The king, the ruler, sits on his throne with one leg down and the other leg crossed under him. And the arm that isn't extended, folded across his middle. These are highly ritualized, meaningful gestures that are found in Asia and in Mesoamerica. So I will point out also, if you think you can't cross the ocean in a small boat, please talk to Chris Bertish, who, having crossed the Atlantic on his paddleboard, as you see, is now preparing to cross the Pacific on a paddleboard. And if you're generous, you can fund Mr. British for his Pacific voyage. They crossed the Atlantic in 2017, and you can go to his website to see how far along he is on his Pacific venture. This is a paddleboard with a little bit added so we can sleep and put some dehydrated food under shelter. But he's paddled it across the Atlantic in this picture. No ifs or buts about it. He had lots of observers. And finally, to close this, upper right, Stela B in Copan, one of the great Maya cities. This is a photograph from 1885 made by the English archaeologist explorer Alfred Mosley, who explored many, many Mayan sites, and made these glass plate photographs, and also made a plaster cast of entire Stela B, which is big. And the plaster cast was taken to London, and it sits in the basement of the British Museum. And down in the lower right is a drawing made by a British Museum professional illustrator of this stela. And she colored in different parts. There's several of her drawings with different parts colored in on each of the different ones. So what she's colored in here, look on the top, are elephant heads. Look over at the photograph that Mosley made in 1885. On the top, especially on the side view to the left, the elephant heads. These are elephant heads. These are not parrots. They're not toucans or macaw beaks. They're elephant heads. And while you can't see very well, but clearly we're drawn by the British Museum illustrator, the elephant heads on the top and also in the middle and lower down. Each elephant head has a little man, it's mahout, sitting on it like mahouts drive elephants in India. So these elephant heads, and there are also elephant heads just like these, and a temple at Kaaba, another Maya site. These suggest that somebody who knew elephants in India, elephants, a sign of rulership, the power of the king, powerful beasts, had these added to the carving of this stela honoring this particular Maya ruler. And this is definitely pre-Columbian. Now, here's an interesting thing. Between Mosley's photographs and plaster casts and 20th century, more or less middle 20th century, somebody vandalized Stela B and knocked the elephant heads off the top. So if you go to Copan now, you're not going to see those elephant heads. Why these were targeted for vandalism, don't know. Well, finally, I've been talking a bit too long, but just in case you want to contact me, here's my email and my website if you want to learn more about me, and an invitation to buy my memoir, History of My Life as an Archaeologist in America. And you can get it at a substantial discount for less than $15. So I thank you.
Thank you, Alice.
And I want to get back to the chats. Okay, here we go. So, Shall I start with the top of the chats? So, okay, people saying that they can or can't hear. I'm sorry. Okay. Cheryl Crowley's out in Montana. So, all right. Does DNA provide any credible evidence for first millennium Christian era Asian, European, West Hemisphere interactions? The problem is that there's really been a very limited amount of ancient DNA analyses. They're very costly and not many labs do them. Ancient DNA, not contemporary. And they have to be, the results have to be compared to particular other ancient DNA databases and contemporary DNA. And there tends to be a very narrow comparison. There are many databases, and in the lab is doing an ancient DNA, they tend to compare. It's a costly procedure to compare to likely other databases, and they usually don't look for what I consider unlikely, that is transoceanic. I can't on the top of my head come on exactly, but that's my answer right now. I could look into it if you'd like. Okay. Now, is that all the questions?
Seems to be.
Well, thank you for your patience and interest, and I will answer any email, and I suggest you look in my website also to see the other books I've written and about my life, and some more pictures of some of my excavations. So very pleased to have been here.
Great. Thank you very much, Alice, for being here, and thanks to the audience for your thoughtful questions and kind comments. Look forward to seeing everyone